This episode of Gridman featured a giant superhero flying out of the sky, doing an amazing kick, and saying the name of that attack out loud as he was doing it. So, you know I freaking loved this episode. Can Yuta gain the affection of Rikka's thighs? That's the question in this episode of Gridman, which was surprisingly poignant, dark, and had some amazing action sequences, one of which that I really loved, and I have to admit I felt slightly disappointed by not getting to see the other members of this Gridman team, the students from Neon Genesis Junior High. We got to see Max again, which is incredibly awesome, I do have to admit, and getting to see him in action in this episode was really one of the highlights, but I'm really anxious to see the other guys and see what sort of crazy combinations that the Gridman's going to come up with. But really, that's like not even really a big part about this entire episode. This episode is more about the complex relationship between Rikka and Akane, yes, the main villain of the series, whose motives are completely unknown outside of the fact that if she doesn't like you very much, she's going to sick her giant fucking Rita Repulsa monsters on you. It's very obvious that Akane seems to have some sort of feelings for Yuta, and Yuta and Rikka also seem to have some sort of past that they're not really getting into here. A lot of it has to do with amnesia. It's strange. I know. Let's just get to the giant superheroes and monsters fighting, right? Wrong. Most of this episode actually consists of Rikka hanging out with her friends and Akane as they go on a date with a bunch of creepy college kids, and doing what all Japanese people do at that age, which is go to karaoke bars and sing very badly. The only reason that Akane is even hanging out with these guys in the first place is so that she can get closer to Rikka and try to have a somewhat normal conversation with her, but she constantly keeps getting bombarded by these super horny dudes. So she says fuck that, she goes back to her house and decides to create a giant monster to hunt these guys down and attack all of them. Ladies, my recommendation, if a guy is creeping on you, use a taser, not a giant Godzilla monster. We actually get to see all of these individual guys getting taken out by this monster, and I have to say that it's actually kind of creepy. The way this like fog rolls in and you don't actually end up seeing this big mysterious monster, which manages to chomp down on all of these guys. There's one scene that's kind of unintentionally funny where one of these guys is getting called by his friends as he's being attacked by a monster, and he's just playing it off like the guy's playing a joke, but he's clearly screaming bloody murder as he's being mutilated by this giant creature, and then suddenly, of course, he's next. The monster itself is absolutely ridiculous in its design. It's like some sort of weird giant caterpillar monster with giant tentacle whips, and it seems to have a shark mouth for a crotch. However, shark crotches are no match for Gridman. Both him and Yuta decide to go into battle, and they utilize the power of Max to transform into Max Gridman, which is another really great scene of watching this dude just absolutely wail on a monster, but without a shadow of a doubt, the best thing about this action scene has got to be the super lightning kick. Yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. It's one of those tried and true anime attacks where a character jumps up in the air, does a giant kick move, and says the name of that move aloud as they do it. It never gets old, and it's done with amazing gusto and trigger style during this scene, and it's probably my favorite part of this entire episode. That and the cool little spin animation he does as the giant monster explodes behind him. It's, like I said, nothing really new or inventive, but man, Trigger just makes it look so freaking badass. It is worth mentioning that Auntie also returns in this episode, actually joining in on the battle and fighting against the other monster, because if anyone's gonna beat up Gridman, it's gonna be him, but he doesn't really end up doing much of anything, even going as far as to going back to his regular human form as he tries to attack Gridman, but nope, that doesn't end up working. So Yuta returns back to Rikka and his friends, and she has a much firmer appreciation for this geeky little kid. So, what's the rundown on this episode of Gridman? A lot of high school shenanigans in this episode right here. A lot of hormones are raging in this one. A lot of it is actually kind of adorable. Yuta wondering if Rikka herself is only into older guys and going on a ridiculous plan of following them around as they're going on this date. I think most of the humor actually comes from the character of Utsumi as well, a character who is little by little becoming my favorite character from the show, mostly because he simply just does not want to admit that he really likes Akane out loud. It's the only reason that he decides to want to actually follow this group, and it's played to great laughs in this episode, especially when Akane decides to leave early. He simply doesn't care about the plan anymore. It doesn't benefit him. Utsumi's transparency is probably one of the funniest things in the entire series. But the good news is, if that other stuff was bothering you, don't worry, you're going to get tons of action in this episode, which again is playing up the fact that this is an anime adaptation of a live-action show, and they managed to honor that in a number of different different ways by continuing to show a lot of this action from the lower camera angles, which always looks really good, but I do have to admit that the action in this episode just started to look a lot better than some of the previous episodes. Maybe a lot of it has to do with the lighting, maybe it was that super lightning kick, I don't know. Everything just looked really smooth and fantastic in this episode, despite the fact that there does still continue to be a little bit of reused animation, which at first kind of bothered me until one of my commenters actually mentioned that this might even be something of an homage to live-action tokusatsu, where they always reuse the same scenes of the characters transforming or utilizing their special abilities. It's just sort of a tradition of the genre. A really cheap tradition, but tradition nonetheless, and they seem to be honoring it here, or it's just a really great excuse to, again, save a little bit of money and time for the animators. Despite that, however, this episode was a surprisingly strong one right here, giving us a tremendous amount of characterization for both Rikka and Yuta, something that I think has been kind of missing from the last couple of episodes, and seems to be one of the cornerstones of the main characters of this series. Yeah, I wanted to see the other members of Neon Genesis Junior High, and we got to see Max again, who, despite being a very big and burly and kind of brutish character, is actually surprisingly deep, especially in his admiration of watching Yuta and Rikka, which he seems to enjoy, but it also seems to annoy him at the same time, as if he's watching sort of a live play-by-play of a reality TV show. Oh, these wacky kids and their problems and fighting against giant monsters. Another great thing is the series continues its great production value. Everything in the show just looks really nice and sharp, whether it be just the characters themselves or the amazing backdrops, which seem very lived in and super realistic, but they're a nice juxtaposition to the big, wacky, ridiculous monsters, which continue to literally look like Japanese men wearing rubber monster suits. And yet, it still manages to have that nice little glaze of amazingness that Trigger always gives to his other shows to make them incredibly distinctive and feel weighty, and most importantly, make those action scenes really fast-paced and very satisfying. I'm really just saying that this episode right here was pretty damned awesome, which is why I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5, another great episode of Gridman, and one you should definitely check out if you are following the show, and if you're not watching Gridman, what the hell's wrong with you? So, there it is. Tell me what you thought about this episode in the comments section, and I will see you all next time. And as always, stay down there, baby.